Good morning. I am Tyler McCann, Chief Engagement Officer at the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute, and I'm pleased to host CAPI's Big Solutions Forum today. While we are all meeting virtually, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the First Nations on whose traditional territories we sit as we watch our screens. I am in Western Quebec, and CAPI's head office is in Ottawa, so I would like to recognize the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, whose traditional and unceded territory we are and would be gathered upon today. As we look forward to the future of the agri-food system and what it means for Canada's land, it is important to acknowledge the long history of Canada's Indigenous people and their connection to that land. It is also important to underscore the essential need to engage all perspectives in our conversations about the future of the agri-food system. I know many of you are familiar with CAPI, but I would like to introduce the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute for those who may not be as familiar. CAPI is an independent policy think tank focusing solely on the agri-food sector, bringing insight, evidence, and creative solutions to agri-food policymakers by creating venues for critical conversations, explaining research results to a broader audience, and being a connector between those who have creative ideas to contribute and those who are making impactful policy decisions. While CAPI was established 17 years ago, the work it does has never been more important. As you know, there are major opportunities and risks on the horizon. This past year has reminded us of the importance of an agri-food system that is resilient to disruption. We also need a system that can meet increasing global demand for high quality food and a system that enables us to do our part to tackle climate change. At the same time, we must set Canada's agri-food system apart in an increasingly competitive and complex global environment. We need to find new ways to drive growth through innovation, creative thinking, and ideas rooted in science and good policy. Canada has certain comparative advantages, but we cannot rest on our laurels. If we want to increase trade and international cooperation, we must build, leverage, and influence international rulemaking. We must find the untapped opportunities, grow and scale, attract investment in value-added processing, and create more sustainable value chains. Put simply, we must find ways to produce more and better with less. We can do this together at CAPI. But we can only do this together at CAPI if we have the right financial partnerships in place. It is through these partnerships that CAPI can continue to be the institution where Canada's agri-food system comes together to do bold, creative, strategic policy thinking, and an institution that produces groundbreaking content, critical connections, and bold communications, all of which are actionable, consumable, and timely. From the beginning, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has been CAPI's significant financial partner. We would not be here today without the significant investment from the department, and we are grateful for their continued support. However, a more diverse funding model is essential for CAPI to have a sustainable future. This new approach to financial partnerships will only be possible because of funders who believe in advancing the agri-food and agriculture sector, funders like you. There are many different ways to support the work of the Institute, as seen listed here, and we are actively seeking funding partners on our work going forward. Your commitment is vital, and it is urgent for us all to come together to intensify our efforts, as agriculture and agri-food can be essential solution providers for the economy, the environment, health, food and global food security, but creative policy changes are essential. Please reach out to me or Janelle Bodie, Director of Fundraising, to explore these different opportunities. We look forward to connecting with you. Today is the final event of the Big Solutions Forum, bringing together over a year and a half of research, dialogue, and engagement with government and industry leaders. Last week, CAPI met with key stakeholders in a dialogue around the conclusions from CAPI's past year of research. The dialogue focused on identifying solutions and strategies for addressing the critical challenges facing the sustainability and prosperity of the Canadian agriculture and agri-food sector. Based on this, CAPI has developed the Creating Prosperity from Chaos Synthesis Report. The executive summary is now live on the CAPI website. The full report will be published in 2 weeks. Please go to CAPI's website, www.capi-icpa.ca, to join the CAPI mailing list to ensure you receive the copy of the full report and stay up to date on future CAPI webinars throughout the year. We are excited to have 2 panels today, first with deputy ministers and the second with industry leaders, to weigh in on the Creating Prosperity from Chaos Synthesis Report and the future prosperity of Canadian agriculture. First, to set the stage for these 2 panel discussions, we will share a short video on the conclusions CAPI has drawn, followed by a brief overview of the Creating Prosperity from Chaos report by CAPI's Chief Strategy Officer, Ted Billier. We will first watch the video in French, and then we will follow it with a video in English.
Nous devons nous réunir pour discuter des possibilités et des risques majeurs qui se profilent à l'horizon, pour élaborer des options politiques et stratégiques qui peuvent permettre au système agroalimentaire canadien de se démarquer. Un système qui est plus résilient aux perturbations, qui répond à la sécurité alimentaire mondiale et nous permet de faire notre part pour lutter contre les changements climatiques. Mais comment y parvenir tout en restant compétitif sur les marchés mondiaux? Nous sommes le moteur de croissance, par l'innovation et la pensée créative, enracinés dans la science, pour contribuer à renforcer notre prospérité dans un ère post-pandémique. Pour être une force de changement, de quelles connaissances et technologies aurons-nous besoin? Disposons-nous des bons systèmes pour adopter une approche santé unique? Une approche qui peut guider ce que nous faisons et garantir que cela est bon pour les plantes, les animaux, les humains et notre santé socio-économique. Le Canada possède certains avantages comparatifs, mais nous ne pouvons pas nous reposer sur nos lauriers. Si nous voulons accroître le commerce et la coopération internationale, quel est l'effet de levier dont dispose le Canada? Comment exercer un effet de levier et influencer l'élaboration des règles internationales? Nous devons trouver les occasions inexploitées, se développer et changer d'échelle, attirer les investissements au secteur agroalimentaire à valeur ajoutée et créer des chaînes de valeur plus durables. Que faudra-t-il pour produire plus et mieux avec moins au Canada? Alors que la demande mondiale d'aliments de haute qualité augmente, comment le Canada peut-il être un chef de file? Nous devons et pouvons le faire ensemble. Commençons.
Et c'est essentiel qu'on commençons ensemble. Maintenant, on va revoir la vidéo en anglais.
We need to come together to discuss major opportunities and risks on the horizon, to develop policy options and strategies that can set Canada's agri-food system apart. A system that is more resilient to disruption, addresses global food security, and enables us to do our part to tackle climate change. But how do we do this while also remaining competitive in global markets? We drive growth through innovation and creative thinking, rooted in science, to help enhance our prosperity in a post-pandemic era. To be a force for change, what knowledge and technologies will we require? Do we have the right systems to embrace a One Health approach? An approach that can guide what we do and ensure it's good for plants, animals, humans, and our socioeconomic health. Canada has certain comparative advantages, but we cannot rest on our laurels. If we are to increase trade and international cooperation, what leverage does Canada have? How can we build leverage and influence international rulemaking? We must find the untapped opportunities, grow and scale, attract investment in value-added processing, and create more sustainable value chains. What will it take to produce more and better with less in Canada? And as global demand for high-quality food rises, how can Canada lead? We must and can do this together. Let's get started.
And now to get started together, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Ted Billier, CAPI's Chief Strategy Officer. He will give us an overview of CAPI's Creating Prosperity from Chaos Synthesis report and the 4 key actions we've identified that will lead to a prosperous Canadian agriculture and agri-food system. Over to you, Ted.
Thank you, Tyler. Good morning, everyone. I will not try to summarize the large body of work supporting CAPI's high level of conclusions in regard to creating prosperity from chaos, as that is detailed in the reports, presentations, and webinars you have been sent and available on the CAPI website. What I will very briefly present are thoughts that CAPI believes are important, as the agri-food industry is both a powerful driver of growth, as detailed by the Advisory Council on Economic Growth, but also an essential life-sustaining industry. CAPI believes thinking more deeply about this is critical. Canadian agriculture is competitive economically and environmentally, as it is low greenhouse gas intensive compared to most of the world. It proved to be relatively resilient during the pandemic. However, future resilience and sustainable growth will require the agri-food system to accelerate productivity gains, improve environmental outcomes, and provide solutions to climate change with sustainable intensification. It will also need to take a One Health approach to strategy, policies, and innovation and regulation. It will need to work with like-minded countries to ensure global sustainability and food security by repairing rule-based trade. And it will need to boost value-added output of the Canadian agri-food system to reduce trade risk, increase resilience, and support domestic food security. We've distilled 4 key actions from the CAPI pre-dialogue on May the 11th, essential for creating prosperity from chaos. First, strategic thinking. Second, we need a systems approach. Third, public-private partnerships will be essential. And fourth, aspirational leadership, perhaps the greatest quality. I will briefly touch on each one. First, strategic thinking. Global agri-food systems and food security are facing myriad challenges: geopolitical, trade, health, disease, environmental, including climate change, water, soil, and biodiversity loss. Policies should flow from strategies that reflect Canada's food system's significant and growing environmental competitive advantage over the next 20 years. Canadian producers have not been able to fully leverage this advantage, as the global agri-food system has accepted high levels of subsidization, externalized costs, compounded by increasing trade disruptions and limited alternatives due to an underdeveloped Canadian domestic food processing sector. Progress requires a coherent shift in policy development to lead in global forums, to raise the bar on health and sustainability standards, to redirect global agriculture subsidies to sustainability, and address trade issues using the One Health paradigm to build leverage. At the same time, we must make a concerted effort to capture more value and lessen trade risk by increasing domestic processing and consumer trust in Canadian product. A successful strategy will require adopting a systems approach, as a sustainable food future is linked to the interdependency of trade, sustainable intensification, environmental outcomes, and food security. The agri-food systems are a product of natural capital, human capital, and socioeconomic capital, requiring systems approaches to investment strategies and policies to optimize environmental, social, and economic outcomes. For the agri-food system to produce the desired joint outcomes, silos in government, academia, and industry need to come down. Canada has the bio capacity, know-how, science, and technology to continue improving agriculture productivity with low GHG intensity products and improved environmental health outcomes. However, no single technology will be the magic bullet. Future success will require a cultural shift in institutions to encourage multidisciplinary approaches to research, building strong linkages between scientists and social scientists and sectors to produce outcome-based socio-technology bundles to assure rapid uptake, acceptance, and maximize economic benefit. Reducing existential threats to the agri-food system requires the adoption of a One Health approach of innovation, regulations, policies, which is by definition a systems approach. Canada is a small country facing the same existential challenges as the big players do. Partnerships and networks to build critical mass and scale will be essential for us in addressing these challenges. The nature and complexity of current and future issues require meaningful public-private partnerships. This applies to players within the same sectors, example, companies within an industry and across industries, and members of academic communities and various governmental institutions. Sustainable growth to create a thriving, resilient, and adaptable agri-food system will be knowledge and data intensive, both residing in various sectors and making partnerships imperative in building trust and sharing knowledge and data. Turning to aspirational leadership, the nature and complexity of current and future issues facing the industry and constantly evolving environment, economy, and society will call for difficult choices. Canada's agri-food system, including industry actions and government policies, has become reactionary, responding to outside pressures rather than setting its own ambitious agenda. The ability to make good choices will be determined by our readiness in terms of having good strategies and policies in place, our ability to adopt a systems approach in all we do, and to establish meaningful public-private partnerships. All require aspirational leadership from all sectors. Aspirational leadership is imperative to optimize outcomes and to move the agri-food system forward successfully. So, to summarize, successfully meeting the complex global agri-food challenges may not be possible without strategic thinking, systems approaches, public-private partnerships, and aspirational leadership. Many questions come to mind. A short list might begin with, are the public and private sector really willing to lead? How do we work better together to implement key actions? What are the opportunities if we get it right? And what are the risks if we don't? So thank you for listening, and back to you, Tyler, to start the day.
Thank you, Ted, and thank you for those questions. We'll dive into them in our two panels now that will follow. To start with our first panel, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Ricky Yatta, who will be moderating the Deputy Minister's panel. Professor Ricky Yatta is the Dean of the Faculty of Land and Food Systems at the University of British Columbia. Prior to his current role, Dr. Yatta was at the University of Guelph, where he held numerous leadership roles, including chair in the Department of Food Science, Assistant Vice President Research, Canada Research Chair in Food Protein Structure, and Scientific Director of the Advanced Food and Materials Network. Dr. Yatta serves on several research and industry organizations and is also currently the president of the Dean's Council of the Faculties of Agriculture, Food, and Veterinarian Medicine in Canada. Over to you, Ricky.
Well, thank you very much, Tyler, and welcome to everyone for the panel. Before we start, I just wanted to have a shout out to CAPI for actually involving the Dean's Council, so thank you, CAPI. I'd also like to do a land acknowledgement. I'm speaking to you from the University of British Columbia, and we're on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam Nation, and we're very, very grateful. To those people who are chiming in today, if there's ever a day to buy a lottery ticket, buy it today. To get 5 deputy ministers at the same event, I think is even rarer than getting a winning lottery ticket. So go out there and buy your ticket today. As for the agenda, we'll ask each of our panel members to give a short introductory statement, about 3 to 5 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a discussion in which we have some questions for our panel members. And we'll ask the audience, if you do have questions, to put them on the chat line, and Tyler will be monitoring this. And hopefully at the end of this panel, we'll have some time to actually address audience questions. But before we get into the actual panel, let me do a quick introduction to our panel members. So our first panel member is Mr. Chris Forbes. Chris is the Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. And previous to this, Chris was Associate Deputy Minister at Finance Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and Assistant Deputy Minister at Environment Canada. Our second panel member is Mr. Simon Kennedy. Simon is Deputy Minister of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. And Simon has overseen ISED's response to the global pandemic, working with industry to pivot. What a word. I think that's one of the overused words of the last year, towards the production of medical supplies and buildup of biomanufacturing capacity in Canada, and partnering with Canadian companies to support innovation and industrial transformation. He previously served as the Deputy Minister of Health and the Prime Minister's personal representative to the G20 from 2012 to 2014. Chris, what you do for the other half hour of the day, I don't know. Our third panel member is Ms. Christine Hogan. Christine is Deputy Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, and Chris was previously the Executive Director for Canada, Ireland, and the Caribbean at the World Bank Corporation, Deputy Minister of International Trade, and served in the Privy Council Office as Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister. Our next panel member is someone who I know from my days at Guelph. Dr. Harpreet Koshar is Associate Deputy Minister of Health, Canada. Harpreet was previously Associate Vice President of Operations at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and was Canada's Chief Veterinary Officer and Canada's Delegate to the World Organization for Animal Health. And our final but not least panel member is Mr. John Hanford. John is Deputy Minister of International Trade. Previous to this, John was the Foreign and Defense Policy Advisor to the Prime Minister and Deputy Minister in the Privy Council Office of the Government of Canada. So a very, very impressive panel. So let's start into the panel. So I'll be asking questions and I'll direct it to certain individuals, but the other deputies, please chime in if you feel that you can contribute. So for the first question, and Christine and Chris, I'm going to direct this to you first. Can we have a climate change policy in light of food security that's not connected to the agri-food policy? And Chris, do you want to kick it off, and then we can have Chris Forbes follow up after you?
Sorry, Ricky, you wanted Chris Hogan will start and I'll follow? Did you want us to do opening remarks, or you decided we're just going straight to questions?
Oh God, okay, fired. Chris, why don't you start with your opening remarks? Sorry.
Okay, yeah, you never take opening remarks away from a deputy minister. That's a critical failure there, Ricky. No, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity today to CAPI for having us. Really pleased to be here, and I am really happy, as Ricky alluded to see my colleagues here, although I will note that we probably all need to have our photos adjusted for the kind of COVID circumstances. Yeah, no, thanks a lot. And I do want to thank Ted and Tyler and the folks at CAPI for the work you've done. I thought it was an interesting summary, and I just want to focus on a few points, and I'll be agreeing with you on a couple, and then I will disagree with you on one point. I hope that's okay. Ted and Tyler, you can cut me off if that disagreement gets too rough. I think the first point I want to make is that, I mean, the overall frame I think that you've presented largely, I think, makes a lot of sense. The world clearly needs more food. There are going to be growing challenges around the world with climate change in different parts, really impacting food production and obviously a growing global population. I think Canada is well positioned to provide some of that food going forward, assuming that we take care of business at home. And we also need to improve our environmental performance, both globally and in Canada. And you focused on, I think, greenhouse gas emissions. I think maybe Chris will talk about some of the other environmental challenges, but certainly I think making sure our ag food systems are contributing, continue to contribute, and even contribute more to our overall environmental sustainability will be a critical challenge. And you touched on the importance of innovation and research and development, and presumably Simon will go there a bit. I think those are critical foundations. They have been of our success in recent years and will certainly be important to making a climate smart food system an underpinning of our economic and environmental story in Canada. You talked a lot, I think, about the story that we tell, and I think we do have a good one to tell, right? And we do tell it abroad and in Canada, the safety of our food, the quality of our food, and our, as you point out, our overall environmental performance. And yes, we can always do better, and I would like to underscore, the importance that you put on all of us speaking with a coherent voice, a collective voice on what we're doing, how we're doing it, and making sure that's well understood abroad. The last thing I'll say, and maybe where I'll challenge you a bit, is on the collaboration and the collaboration of public, private sector, and across governments. I actually think, and we never should rest on our laurels entirely, as you say, that we do a pretty good job, both inside the federal government, across governments, and with the private sector. We have an ag policy framework. Federal, provincial governments work on 5-year intervals. I think a level of coordination that isn't seen in all aspects of the Federation in terms of shared funding and sharing priorities. We certainly, there's examples like our Trade Commission service, I would argue, where we do work well collectively speaking abroad and representing Canadian companies abroad. And we are trying to pilot, new ways to work. And many of you would know, obviously, within the Food Inspection Agency and AAFC, we've worked to combine some of our workforce to speak more with one voice, particularly in international fora, between the regulator and the Market Access Secretariat. And there are other examples like that. So I don't think that, again, we should call victory there, but I think we have a strong foundation of collaborative work. And within the federal government, and my colleagues can attest to this, we do work to bring a whole of government approach to issues, to sectors, and make sure that we are basing our positions and our views on the full range of information. So could go through examples on that. Maybe that'll be in the Q&A, but I do think that there's a strong foundation of collaboration in the ag-food sector, and one that serves us very well. Ricky, I will stop there and I guess pass it on to Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Simon?
Yeah, thanks. No, it's really great to be here with everybody virtually. Some of the folks on the invitation list, I think I probably worked with. I certainly recognize a bunch of names from my days at the Agriculture Canada, the Sir John Carling building 20-something years ago, at the dawn of actually the idea of creating CAPI. So it's really something to be 20 years later and see the institution rolling along and doing the work that it's doing. I'll maybe talk in more general terms about, I guess our view of where some of the issues are going in the economy. If I cast my mind back to the way that we were trying to think about agricultural policy and the dialogue with the industry back, at the start of the millennium, 2000, 2001. And again, this is just a sort of personal reflection, but I think I would say that the discussion we were trying to have was to say that, notwithstanding how special kind of some of the assets, the natural capital, the land, Canada's been really blessed with this amazing kind of agricultural bounty, and it's a huge advantage for us globally. But as an industry, there's nothing particularly special about the kinds of pressures or risks facing the agriculture sector. That's been a story that maybe has been told for a long time. We have these unique risks of weather, et cetera. Well, what we were trying to say at the time, I think, was actually a lot of the kinds of pressures and issues that are intruding on all the rest of the economy are exactly the same pressures and issues intruding on agriculture. And we really got to take, and agri-food, I would say, and we really got to take those pretty seriously, because they're kind of existential issues that are going to affect competitiveness and prosperity long term. And I think one of the interesting things about the pandemic, people ask about they ask me about the pandemic and some of the work that we're doing on biomanufacturing and vaccines and this sort of thing. And I tend to say, you know, what I find sort of interesting about the pandemic is, in a sense, all of the things that we're worried about post-pandemic are exactly the same things that we were worried about pre-pandemic. All the pandemic has done is put a giant red, you know, line underneath the urgency of dealing with them. And so if I had to, you know, kind of summarize it all in a series of bumper stickers, I would say there are real issues around the resiliency of supply chains and the kind of resiliency of the kind of model we have. We saw that come out. I mean, fortunately, the agriculture sector, I think, was, you know, actually was able to overcome that, and we didn't see the kinds of things that we were really worried about, frankly, in the early days, about things like food shortages and so on. But we certainly saw some real issues around the resiliency of supply chains. And I can tell you, in government, supply chain resiliency was a really serious concern in a whole bunch of sectors, even before the pandemic. Digital has been something that governments have been talking about for a long time. We saw more digital adoption, perhaps not in the ag sector. I apologize, I don't have as much familiarity with what may have been happening in the last year, but certainly if you look at in the retail sector or in other parts of the business sector, we've seen more digital adoption in the last 18 months than we've seen perhaps in the last 10 years, because it became an existential threat that if you weren't able to go digital, you actually were going to go out of business. And the contention, I think, that would have been made pre-pandemic is that was going to happen anyway. If you don't eventually adopt digital, and not just for a digital storefront, but actually digital in your operations, if you're not taking advantage of data and digital, you will eventually go out of business. It may not be next year, maybe 5 years from now. And what's interesting when you look at the projections is that you discover most of the analysts say that a very significant percentage of marginal GDP in the next 4 to 5 years will come from data and digital technology. The value will actually be in the ability to be more efficient, faster, better than the competition, which will come from the ability to exploit, you know, machine learning, big data analytics, et cetera, logistics. You know, the actual, whatever it is you're producing in some respects isn't where you're going to get your competitive advantage. It's going to come from how you're actually doing your business and your ability to use information better than the next guy. And there's tons of evidence to suggest that's true. If you look at the value of the stock market, the value of the stock market now is mostly made up of intangibles. Actually, the value of the company is mostly in non-physical assets, not in the actual hard stuff that's, you know, in the warehouse. Green was a big imperative, you know, pre-pandemic. You would have thought with an international crisis like a pandemic that all the political attention and everything would all be on that, and then other things like climate change might be put in the back burner. But the exact opposite has happened internationally. It's not just Canada, it's the US, it's Europe, that actually, if anything, there's been a lot of wind at the sails of the notion that we have to take systemic risk very seriously. Inclusion has become a big issue in the pandemic. You know, when people saw the impact of the pandemic, the disproportionate impact, that has a spillover, I think, into agriculture when it comes to things like TFWs and labor and so on. And the other thing I would say, which I thought your report, and it does speak to Chris's issue around, you know, whether we work together well, you can see that actually increasingly the ability to be cross-sectoral, flexible, move across disciplines is actually key. If you want to have a resilient, digital, green, you know, more inclusive economy, which I think everybody thinks this is where we need to go, that it actually does demand a new way of working together. And frankly, you know, all you need to do is look at the response to the pandemic. So I'll give you just 2 quick examples and then I'll be done. One of the leading developers of an antibody therapy is Abcelera in British Columbia. It's a Canadian company. They've been working with Eli Lilly on this monoclonal antibody. In some ways, they're actually a kind of an artificial intelligence company masquerading as a biotech company. They use machine learning and AI to rapidly figure out which monoclonal antibody candidates are the best. Part of their comparative advantage comes from bringing together machine learning with biology. If you look at messenger RNA, you know, the kind of leading vaccines, there's a very good case to be made that it's a similar version. This is about, you know, cross-disciplinary work has become the way in which you get advantage and the way you solve problems. And, you know, frankly, the little speech I just gave, helps to articulate why we're pursuing the kinds of priorities we're pursuing when it comes to microeconomic policy. The supercluster program is about breaking down barriers, bringing together non-traditional actors. There's an enormous amount of work we're doing on on decarbonization. The government has given us substantial resources to support decarbonization. That is not just about cars. That is not just about the oil sands. It's also about the huge potential in the ag sector to actually, sequester carbon, reduce emissions. So we think we need to do more with Chris and others across the government, because to yield the emissions reductions, we have to be looking at sectors beyond the kind of traditional sectors we look at. And it's why we're putting such an enormous amount of work on digital adoption and the use of advanced technologies like quantum and AI. And I think, all of the stuff that you presented in the report of CAPI resonates with me, because I think it is in this space. It's about cross-sectoral work. It's about adoption of technologies. It's about dealing with some of the environmental issues. So I think it did resonate with me. Thanks for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Simon. Christine?
Okay, fingers crossed people can hear me, because I was late to the discussion today. Okay, great. I see the thumbs up from my colleagues. Well, hello. This is my first opportunity to engage with CAPI, so it's great to be here. Thank you very much, Professor Yada, for your nice introduction. Je voudrais commencer par noter mon appréciation aux organisateurs des événements et aux participants pour m'avoir offert l'occasion de participer aujourd'hui à cette discussion. I appreciated Ted's very efficient but also very pointed focus on those four preoccupations for us, and I think they're useful for framing today's discussion: strategic thinking, systems approaches, partnerships, and of course aspirational leadership. None of you will be surprised to hear me sort of focus some of my brief comments on the fact that creating prosperity from chaos, as CAPI has called it, that the promise will be even brighter if their strategies fully embrace environmental imperatives. And of course, there are two. We often hear most of the discussion around climate, but there are two very compelling crises upon us: biodiversity, of course, as well as climate change. Often these are seen as constraints, but I think the agricultural sector, the agri-food sector, probably knows better than most, as your basic existence has its roots in nature. So let me just talk for a couple of minutes, if you'll allow me, on both of those: biodiversity loss and climate, and of course the intersection points. I want to get to the issue that Chris addressed off the top, Simon mentioned, and Ted had in his comments about coherence as well. So I don't think it comes as any surprise. The science is very clear that global biodiversity loss is in serious decline. And this will have and is having a direct and significant impact on agricultural production. It will be important to identify opportunities for achieving food production objectives that maintain and even improve Canadian indicators of biodiversity on agricultural lands. And nature, or biodiversity, is our very best ally in many ways against climate change, important for reducing the risks of future pandemics and key to achieving the One Health approach that's been referenced. To protect nature and leverage its potential as a climate solution, all orders of government, indeed every Canadian, including Indigenous Canadians, non-governmental organizations, industry, have to work together. And this imperative simply won't be realized if we continue to work in silos. So we in government, across government, are also preoccupied with this challenge of coherence and how to disrupt, if you will, some of the silos that have existed in the past. One of the things I would point to is, and it's quite an exciting area, this goes to the idea of strategic thinking, but also aspirational leadership, and that's the space that Canada is beginning to take up around nature-based climate solutions. There's a lot of work around Canada's Nature Legacy program. We're working increasingly intensively with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada in this space. We're engaging provinces I think the sectoral approach will hopefully lead to some out-of-the-box thinking, some new approaches, scaling up of approaches that have worked, which we often don't talk enough about. It isn't that the solutions aren't necessarily there, it's that sometimes they just haven't been scaled to a degree that we're really achieving the results that we know we can. Just a quick couple of words on the climate work that is going on, and I know you live and breathe the climate challenge, the people participating in this meeting today. So let me just make a couple of quick references to the new climate plan that the government released in December, the Strengthened Climate Plan, which outlines 64 initiatives, and the budget just released, of course, announced even further. Simon referenced the role that his department is playing in industrial decarbonization. This is really a plan that builds on work that was really launched back in 2016, the Pan-Canadian framework that I know many of you are familiar with. All told, if you take the Pan-Canadian framework and you add the initiatives that are outlined in the new Strengthened Climate Plan, the government is pursuing, along with provinces and territories, literally over 100 different concrete measures to make progress on climate. The climate plan, this climate plan, though, I think really tackles very directly the call that many have had for a comprehensive and coherent approach. It really is a whole of government effort. It's driven by science, it's sectoral in many ways in its focus. And for those in the ag and agri-food sector, there's three particular thematics that I think pop off out of the plan. The plan itself is organized around 5 pillars, but I'd point you to 3 that are particularly relevant to our conversation today. One being, as I mentioned in biodiversity, the embracing the power of nature to really create more resilient communities. And here, the Nature Smart Climate Solution Fund is a real new and different type of program that will hopefully get at issues around conservation and restoration of wetlands, land management practices, and we're very pleased to see a very close cooperation with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada on that. The other is, of course, some of the more recent initiatives that are outlined in the budget and on climate smart agriculture. Simon mentioned the industrial decarbonization and the efforts across government to decarbonize and achieve the goal of net zero by 2050. The agricultural sector historically and is sort of at that stable range of about 10% of Canada's GHG emissions. And I think it's going to be really important that we continue to work with the agricultural and agri-food sector to continue to make progress. Several initiatives are moving forward, whether that's the clean tech area, agri-food sector, the role of clean fuels, growing Canada's clean fuels industry, and of course, food waste. The third pillar that I just would quickly mention, which is one that probably won't get a lot of discussion necessarily in today's meeting, but is around resilience and adaptation. And for the first time ever, we're pursuing a national adaptation strategy with, of course, all of our partners, provinces, territories, and we're keen, obviously, for the role that the agriculture sector can play, and happy to learn more about how CAPI is thinking about those types of issues. The only last piece I would just flag is around sustainable finance. There have also been some really stepped up efforts working with the Department of Finance, working with other federal departments, with the financial sector around the issues of financial markets and nature and climate related disclosures. And I think these will be interesting dimensions of our work around the environmental agenda as we move forward. So I think I'll stop there. I think that's sufficient for some opening comments to set the stage.
Thanks, Christine. Over to you, Harpreet.
Thank you, Ricky, and good morning. Bonjour à tous et toutes. We'll start by acknowledging the traditional territory of Algonquin and Anishinaabe, and also thanking CAPI for bringing us all together. I'd be remiss if I did not begin by acknowledging the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has on all of us. As your report noted, this global crisis has had devastating impacts on so many Canadian businesses and people around the world. We have to all adapt to new ways of operating. Yet despite the challenge, pandemic has inspired collaboration and innovation across disciplines, each working together to find timely solutions to very, very complex problems. I'll focus just on the Health Canada perspective. There's been a number of regulatory flexibilities provided to ensure that there were minimal disruptions to the supply chain for health products and food. And Health Canada has put in place several interim orders to expedite access to medical devices, clinical trials, as well as allowing certain foods, specific ones like infant formulas, to be imported into Canada in the event of potential shortage. It was not only the government that came together, but the agri-food sector in particular has also shown remarkable resilience throughout the pandemic by stepping up to provide Canadians with continued access to safe and nutritious food options despite domestic and international quarantines and logistical challenge. For this, I want to sincerely thank you all. Now, as the report highlighted, I think there are a number of interconnected factors in addition to COVID-19, such as impact of climate change, food insecurity, shifting consumer demands that are driving change in agri-food sector. And these factors are challenging our existing regulatory systems also. And these will require us to continue to prioritize our efforts towards modernization of regulatory systems so that it better supports the innovation and growth within the agri-food sector. But supporting innovation is not only about changing the regulations, it's much more than that. So to that end, we are working to ensure that our rules are clear, transparent, predictable, and that's a regulatory view. I also want to touch, as also noted in the report, the complex and dynamic interaction between environment, human health, and animal health. That is the focal area that is becoming extremely relevant. In my previous role as chief veterinarian, this was a centerpiece when those dialogues happened with World Organization for Animal Health Codex or with WHO. And I think the past year has taught us again about how priorities can change rapidly. It is difficult to imagine the main topic of conversation over the past year was devastating impact of transmission of viruses from animals to humans and how our globally connected systems are bearing the brunt of it. And this novel coronavirus is a clear example of how we need to understand the relationship between environment, humans, and animals, and to also address the potential threats of the future pandemic. And that is where the critical area of One Health approach comes in. And I know that all of you would agree that this is a really, really critical area. We continue to take a little bit of a siloed approach, and that's mentioned in your report also, from researchers in academia to businesses looking for area of investment, producers, manufacturers, and distributors. But what we are really making a concerted effort to get ahead is to proactively prevent what might be coming next, working across the continuum, using foresight, using AI, and all the other investment opportunities, research priorities, and regulations so that we can actually have a One Health approach. One of the critical examples is antimicrobial resistance. Like that is the piece where we have all known that AMR is in fact, the struggle to address AMR is in fact, that the economic environment for developing new antimicrobials is often uninviting. And there have been numerous calls, and that's a very, very clear example. And in my role as Deputy Minister Champion for Science and Technology, I look forward to continuing that work in terms of partnering with stakeholders like you, because to gather relevant evidence and information to support the innovative solutions. So I'll end by focusing on these two pieces, but I really appreciate the work of CAPI over the past year in facilitating work in these areas and bringing the industry and government partners to a common dialogue. And I think working together, we will contribute to like a more sustainable food system, improve global food security, and also access to safe and nutritious food. So I'll stop here, Ricky, and we'll save some time for Q's and A's. Thank you.
Thanks, Harpreet. And finally, John.
Thanks very much, Professor Yada. And having watched all of my colleagues do their presentation, I've come to the view that Chris Forbes's comment that we need to update our photos was actually directed at me, and it's duly noted. Thank you. So look, I don't want to repeat the comments that were made by my colleagues. I think we've covered a lot of ground, and I guess what I would draw out, or maybe a couple of things. I think we have talked about the global nature of some of the challenges that face us right now, and those are at least three-pronged, and I think interact. There is a geopolitical reality right now, which is challenging on a whole series of international fronts, but obviously has a real bearing on trade and is particularly relevant in the sector we're discussing today. That overlaps with the climate challenge, which Chris and others have set out as an issue, which again has pretty profound ramifications systemically, but also with respect to issues around food security and around use of land and the way in which we interact as an international system. And I think those drivers together create very genuine challenges for us to think about from a policy perspective as we engage in the international system and think about how we frame our interests and advance our interests in that system. But by the same token, there are real advantages we bring to this. In terms of climate, I was struck, Ted, in your presentation and in the presentation at the outset of this, that this is a branding opportunity for us. We do have an industry where we have something to brag about with respect to carbon use, and that's something we should think about as we are stepping into new markets and presenting the advantages of Canada in those markets. Similarly, in terms of food security, we have a real role to play, as we always have, but that is even more pronounced in a situation where climate creates real challenges, as do the geopolitical drivers. So part of that is in the world of rules development and how trade policy responds to the kinds of challenges we have. And there, I think what we've seen over the last few years and what was brought into real relief during the pandemic was how the rules ensure that our interests are advanced. And I think on the whole, actually, as a number of people have mentioned, food trade and agricultural trade did reasonably well through this period. And so we did see that supply chains remained open, but it certainly brought home where we have potential vulnerabilities, and including vulnerabilities in the possible reaction to the situations we've confronted in the form of protectionism. And so being vigilant in that and thinking about how that intersects with the current negotiations that we are engaged in or contemplating, it's critical that we think as to how our rules are shaped and how they are then vindicated once they are actually agreed to. And that really then drives us to a policy that we've been pursuing for a period of time, but again was underlined in the current period, which is trade diversification. We continue to see the need for us to ensure that we are not focused on simple supply lines that could be vulnerable. So to think about how our supply lines are shaped and how the rules facilitate those. we are looking increasingly at the development of rules at the global level in the World Trade Organization, and how we will be working towards a ministerial meeting towards the end of this year where agriculture will be relevant, but also looking at how we build upon the relationships that we've developed through the existing free trade agreements that we have already negotiated. And as we like to remind people, we now have free trade agreements with all the other members of the G7, and those are having real effects in the range of sectors, but including agriculture. We've seen very positive responses, particularly as a result of the CPTPP, in some of our exports to Asia. As we think about what the next steps are, we are looking to deepen our relationships, particularly in Southeast Asia, as we've engaged in conversations with the ASEAN bloc about the future of our trading relationship there, and then looking at some of the specific members of the ASEAN bloc, including Indonesia, as to how we can deepen our ties. That's all with a view to making sure that we have a rules-based trading system that is relevant to our interests and that defends our interests as we look to essentially spread the risk environment through diversification. I guess as a final point, I would just emphasize then how critical the Trade Commissioner Service network is in facilitating all of this work and making it real. The rules matter a lot, but the rules could be relatively abstract if we don't have people on the ground who are very actively thinking about what our interests are, where our opportunities are, and facilitating the kind of contacts that are necessary for us to deepen our ties. And there, the Trade Commissioner Service has been essential. We've just passed our 100th anniversary of the Trade Commissioner Service, 125th anniversary of the Trade Commissioner Service. And so this is, a real, this has been a long-standing part of our overall trade toolbox, but is critical right now as we engage with our trading partners. And here, I think I'd just like to maybe end with the point that Chris Forbes ended with, which is about the integration of our services, because I really do think that as we reach out into new markets and we interact with new players, we've actually worked extremely closely and effectively together. And I think that is critical. I totally take the point that we need to be avoiding silos, but I think we have some areas of performance to be proud of as we think about how we have actually behaved in the field and how we've looked to sort of maximize our impact. There's always more that we can be doing, but I think the point is well taken and is being acted upon, that we need to be as integrated as possible. So Professor Yetta, I'll end with that and look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, John. And let me thank all the panel members for their very sage and insightful comments. And personally, I would like to thank the panel members and their respective ministries, because I think what your ministries have done have been exemplar to the words pivoting, resiliency, and innovation. So thank you very much for all that you've done for Canada and Canadians during these challenging times. So in the effort to redeem myself now as the moderator and go to the Q&A, and Tyler, I'm just doing a time check. I think we have about 13 minutes left, Tyler, if I'm not mistaken.
We should have a full 15.
Okay, great. So I'm going to return to the question that I so rudely started off with prior to the introductory statement. So Christine and Chris, this was directed to you, but the other panel members, please feel free to chime in. And I'll just repeat the question. Can we have a climate change policy in light of food security that is not connected to the agri-food policy? And so, Christine, do you want to kick it off, and then we'll turn it over to Chris, and then maybe the other panel members will chime in?
So, no, we can't.
Okay.
We can't have a climate policy that's, can you hear me okay? Yeah. I don't think we can have a climate policy that's disconnected or not integrated with how we think about agricultural policy, I think, and obviously there are lots of reasons for that. If you just think about the climate issue on a global scale, which I didn't talk about, but obviously global food security issues are a major challenge, exacerbated by the sort of pace at which climate change is now happening and our ability to adapt. What I would respond though is that I think we're not there, we're not perfect, but I do think that every day we're doing more to bring these policies closer together, and alignment and coherence are watchwords for us as we think about the evolution of Canada's climate change policies, and the work that we're doing with agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, for example, on the nature-based climate solutions, the direct work that's happening in the agricultural sector and agri-food sector around food waste is a big preoccupation that is now nested as a feature of the climate policies that were happening. Lots of work to do, including everything from the research and development side of things to the application of technologies and solutions, and policy making that happens in between those.
Thanks, Christine. Chris, do you want to chime into this one?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with no as well, in the sense of no to the question. I'm happy to chime in. And I think Chris has made the points really well. I mean, I think there is a need, to find, as she has alluded to, I think more climate-friendly ways for us to operate as a country, and that includes how we produce our food. I think there's a lot of good work that goes on in the ag sector that needs to be recognized and I think deepened. And we are, as she pointed out, working collaboratively on a lot of the issues. And there's a huge science component, Ricky, as you would know well, in terms of we don't have all the solutions now, but it doesn't mean we can't work together to search for them. And that will take a lot of partnerships with our external partners in this private sector and obviously in the colleges and universities. Last thing I'll say, which is just a quick reference to one of the comments in the Q&A, the written Q&As, is I think that when it comes to climate smart or low footprint agriculture, obviously technology is one of our friends, and the need for better broadband, better connectivity across the country is something that I know Simon and his department are very engaged on, and recent budgets have put some money into. I don't know if Simon wants to add on that, but I think it's a critical piece.
Great, thanks, Chris. Simon, did you want to chime in?
Well, just on the broadband thing, and I think actually there was some questions in the chat thing too. My hope will be, I think there's good reason to think we're going to have a really big chunk of the lack of rural broadband issue solved in the next 4 or 5 years. And this is not a commercial for the government. My job is to, share facts and whatever, but I can just say objectively, the amount of investment going into rural broadband, let's say over the last 2 or 3 years, is literally an order of magnitude over what it has been historically. So I think we're spending 10 to 15 times more in total on broadband expansion over the last 3 or 4 years and in the next couple of years than we've spent in every other program combined since the government got into this area of business. And we're going to have most of the country hooked up to high-speed broadband probably by 2026, and then the remaining houses by 2030. And I know this partly because I'm responsible for delivering the program, and I can assure you we have billions of dollars and a lot of applications in covering most of the country, which we're assessing right now. On the broader issue, I guess I would say no as well. I mean, we got to look at all this holistically. I think one of the things the pandemic has taught us, to be frank, is we got to take systemic risks really seriously. And systemic risks tend to respect only one thing, and that's the science. They don't actually care what your beliefs are. They don't really care what your priorities are. If you're not conforming to the evidence and the data, you're gonna pay a big price. And so climate change is a systemic risk. There are opportunities there with climate change. And I think the trick is we're gonna have to figure out how to live with it and adapt to it and mitigate it and do it in ways that actually, you know, contribute to our country's prosperity and way of life. But but the notion that can we have, you know, can we do one thing without thinking about the other? I think that's kind of, you know, in a way that's like old think. We're going to have to figure out a way to organize our society and organize our activities in a way that respects the fundamental science. Otherwise it's not going to be very good.
Great, thanks, Simon. Harpreet, John, any comment on this one? Okay, well, then I'm going to move on to another question, which I think all of the panel members could probably chime into. And the question is, why don't we do a better job of leveraging our domestic strengths in the international fora, such as our low GHG intensity, our contribution to global food security, and our surplus biocapacity? And I would say, Simon, you know, maybe biomanufacturing, which should we see us producing more value-added products for the world? I guess the last part, I think Canada has been known as a net exporter of commodities and an importer of value-added. So I don't know who wants to kick that one off. John, maybe?
Yeah, I can maybe start.
Yeah.
I guess I would sort of gently push back on the premise of the question. And I think obviously we can always do more. We can always sort of take better advantage of the opportunities that we have. And I mentioned earlier, you know, there's a branding opportunity with respect to the way in which we do our agriculture, and that's something that you mentioned in the report. And I think it's a valid area for us to work even harder on. But I do think that, you know, I guess I'd make some sort of core observations. First of all, I think we have quite a significant influence with respect to the international processes that we engage in. And that's partially because we have some of the most experienced international actors in the Canadian system. I mean, we have, as a result of all the trade negotiations that we've engaged in, I think we have probably the most experienced ag trade negotiators in the world right now. And that's a huge advantage as we think about developing new rules and think about how we deploy that kind of a resource to shape the standards that then will influence how international trade flows will work. Similarly, and Chris will speak to this with more authority than me, but as we engage in international standards organizations, we have real expertise that we bring to bear as well, and people who have spent long periods of time building up credibility in those fora, which is deployed to our interest. And so I think, as I say, more can always be done, but I do feel like we actually do have some real assets right now that we should recognize and make sure we are using to their best effect.
Thanks, John. Chris, did you want to chime into this one?
Just to say, I agree with John. I mean, I think we can always strive to do better, and we're always at Ag Canada, and I think John's team and ours work really closely together in a range of fora. We're always open to advice on how we can do better, but I think we do engage on multiple levels, whether it is through the standard setting bodies at the WTO, bilaterally, or with private sector to private sector even, right? I think there's a lot of work that goes on government, and I think working quite well usually with the sector in terms of presenting our case and kind of outlining the Canadian approach to regulation, to agricultural production in a way that we'd like to see others support and often adopt. So sure, there's more we can do, but I feel like there's a lot of rowing in the same direction, I feel right now.
Great, thanks, Chris. I've just been given the 5-minute warning. So I think I'm going to jump to a question for Harpreet. And this is around One Health, Harpreet. And the question is, what more can be done to promote the One Health approach across government? And how can Canada play a more influential role in international organizations such as the OIE that address One Health? It's a mouthful, but...
Yeah, no, that's a really pertinent question. And regarding promotion of of the One Health approach across the government, I really fundamentally see there are positive signs that we are doing better job at recognizing the interconnectedness between human health, animal health, and environment. So I already mentioned this, but take AMR as an example. The mandate commitment for the minister is, which reflects the One Health approach. AMR being an example of that, where Minister of Health is asked to work with the Minister of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, as well as Agriculture and Agri-Food and ECCC in addressing this threat. So as we go more and more deep into the issues, we have an international, kind of collaboration which is going on. We are influential in international arena. For example, whether you go into those OIE ad hoc working group on AMR, Canadian experts are playing a big role in that. We have reps in the Codex Alimentarius task force on AMR. So, and I must say, Ricky, given that you hold the position of a chair of all the deans of different faculties, this has been a constant thing where we are looking at how the academic arm, how the different arms of the government, and how the research can be brought together really to focus on those things which really help us to focus in the area where we can predict things happening. Is this a way how we can say the global warming is actually creating more diseases, which actually jump species from animals to humans, which become the real pandemic of the future? And if we have to actually focus on that, we'll really need to do that. The first call when I was appointed onto this job was from Brian Evans, and mentor and a colleague. And the thing was that really One Health will be your focus. Will it be? And I said, yes, absolutely. Because given, we are at that stage internationally. I must say, UK, France, and Germany, we've had these collaborative calls along with Canadian Institute of Health Research and other partners to say, how can we bring One Health as a core theme? And CAPI has organized, recognized that. And really, our idea of getting One Health to a point where it becomes a natural, way of thinking. How do we actually plan our investments, plan our collaborations so that we can address this very, very important thing across the board? Organizations like academics and research, as well as from regulatory agencies and the different parts of the government. And I think the collaboration piece and working with the international partners has had a Canadian stamp on it. And we continue to do more, and we probably would be doing a little more in terms of our way of projecting it by showing some investment, as well as by proving that this is the area where we will need to focus on.
Thank you, Harpreet. So you've given the deans some homework, and we'll work with you on that homework. Tyler, I think we're probably at time. So let me thank all the panel members for their very insightful comments. As I said, thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know this is challenging with Zoom. I think what we've noticed is the Zoom scenario of back-to-back. And so hopefully you can get out and get some physical activity today. And hopefully this is getting close, I guess not, to your last Zoom meeting. I'm sure you have many more. But thank you again. Thank you to CAPI for having the deans involved. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to the panel members once again. So Tyler, back over to you.
Great, thank you, Ricky, and again, thank you to all the deputies for taking part in the discussion, and a special kudos to those deputies that engaged in typing answers into the Q&A. We had quite a strong engagement from our audience, and what we'd like to do is take these questions, we'll share them with the departments, try and get some further answers from them, and then distribute them back to participants. But again, really appreciate the kind of the passion and the engagement from the deputies. Clearly, this intersection of trade, food security, environment, and its impact on the agri-food system is something that's top of mind for government, and we appreciate your participation and your engagement this morning. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce one of the Institute's board members, Rory Mcalpine, who will be moderating our industry leaders panel. Rory is recently retired as a senior VP in government and industry relations with Maple Leaf Foods. Prior to his time at Maple Leaf, Rory served as a deputy minister at the BC Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries. He held roles at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada's Director General of the International Trade Policy Directorate, Executive Director of the National Farm Products Council, and as Director of the Grains and Oilseeds Division, and a Deputy Director of Multilateral Trade. So with that, Rory, over to you.
Thank you, Tyler. And thank you to everyone for joining this CAPI event virtually. I've been privileged to be a board member now for about 6 months, and a lot is on the go, and we look forward to engaging you going forward on a lot of the research. We've got here a great industry panel. I'm not sure we can quite match the Deputy Minister's panel, but we sure have 5 great leaders from the industry and from the science perspective as well in government. So we're going to jump right into the Q&A format here. So whereas Ricky, maybe Ricky should have been moderating this one because that's the way he wanted to get into it, but that's the way we're playing this one. We're not going to do any initial statements. So let me first introduce the panel. And I want to start with Monsieur Gaetan Desroches. Gaetan is the CEO of Solio Cooperative Group, formerly known as Coop Fédéré. He's been active as a leader in the agri-food sector of Quebec and internationally for over 30 years. Next, Dr. Bettina Hemland is President and CEO of Ontario Genomics. And prior to that, Bettina served as VP of NSERC's Research Partnerships Directorate. And she has over 15 years experience in biotech and international pharmaceutical industry. So I'm sure she can give us a real science grounding in some of the themes we need to talk about. Next is Bill Gruel. Bill is CEO of Protein Industries Canada, one of the supercluster organizations that Simon Kennedy referred to. And it's driving growth and is a real model of collaboration in advancing innovation, particularly in plant-based proteins in Canada. Previously, Bill was with the Ministry of Agriculture in Saskatchewan, and he has private sector experience in the seed industry as well. Next, we have Caitlin Duncan. Caitlin is a farm management consultant with Backswath Management based in Saskatchewan, where we heard earlier this morning, it sounds like they're finally getting a little rain. And Caitlin has worked on farms in Africa and Australia. And she most recently has been managing the family grain farm near Regina. And finally, we have Chris Terrace, VP Global Strategy and President of TELUS Agriculture Canada. Chris and his team are focused on verticalizing TELUS's technology and expertise in agriculture. And I'm really interested to hear about Chris's view of this. TELUS is placing a big bet on our industry and the application of digital technologies to the problems and the opportunities. And it'll be very interesting to hear his point of view on this. So let's get into the Q&A.
Maybe I will start with Mr. Desroches. Mr. Desroches, good morning. First of all, you heard well. CAPI has defined certain objectives. Are these the right objectives? And if they are the right objectives, how can we get there? Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for CAPI for having invited me. Yes, I think that you have identified the right objectives. I have 6 elements that I have come up with regards to industry. First of all, more sustainable production. And I think that's an imperative. We have no choice. And then value-added products, which means extend value chains, processing here at home. That's very important. These 2 elements will be able to take place thanks to technology. I saw TELUS here, so I'm sure that will help as well. But we will need technology transfer for farms and for industries. artificial intelligence will be very important. You mentioned that. And then we also talked about the bandwidth. I think that is important as well. The government's investment there will be very important for the regions. Fourth, partnerships. Yes, partnerships with governments, but also all the startups. We need to use those to be successful in bringing this agriculture to be more productive, but also more respectful of the environment. We also talked about trade, the importance of the geopolitical. This is so important for me because for us at Stolio Group, we have a lot of exports. So we need to make sure that trade regulation, without having to be homogenous, to be clear and transparent, to take back the words of the Deputy Minister. And also to ensure that we talk a lot about diseases, but to make sure that our ports we will be able to prevent certain diseases to come here, like the African disease there for hogs. So I think that you have identified the right ways to go.
Thank you, Gaetan. So look, maybe you've laid out 6 priorities from your perspective. They seem to resonate with the CAPI themes. Maybe Chris, Terrace, could I turn to you then? Gaetan mentioned technology, mentioned sustainability, value added. So again, I look at TELUS and say, wow, you look carefully at the risk and opportunity. You've committed millions to a sector and a long-term horizon. So help us understand then what's motivating you, and are in fact the digital solutions in these areas readily available, and how do we achieve the uptake in a priority fashion?
Yeah, thanks, Rory. I appreciate that. There's a lot of questions in what you asked there, and I'll try and answer them. I think from a TELUS standpoint, our foray into agriculture really isn't a diversification strategy. We're trying to verticalize our technology that we have today in an industry that we feel is ripe for digitization. It's born out of the experience that we have with TELUS International, which is one of our business units, and TELUS Health. And I think the TELUS Health one is very illustrative to agriculture and food. In that instance, we spent a number of years digitizing the primary care health ecosystem, if you will. So physicians, clinicians, patients, and pharmacies. And we look at agriculture a lot the same way. So I think when we started looking at agriculture as an industry to apply our technology and our talent within the team to, we probably romanticized the notion of drones and robots on farms and things like that. But as we took a step back, and this is very much in line with the CAPI recommendations, we really saw an ecosystem that had the opportunity to apply technology. So there's really 3 verticals that we're focused on. The first is agri-food. So in that instance, you've got ag retail, you've got input manufacturers, you've got banks and insurance companies and equipment manufacturers. So everyone is kind of supplying inputs to farmers or producers. The second is the notion of primary production, so farmers and ranchers, and how can we create better technology and software and devices for them to be more efficient, more effective, more sustainable in their production practices, but I would also say more economically viable. So how can you create a greater profit for a producer? And in that instance, the data derived from all of that is very interesting and exciting. And I think it ties downstream to the third vertical that we're looking at from a TELUS agriculture standpoint, and that's really agri-food. So in that instance, you've got retailers, you've got processors, CPGs, you've got quick serve restaurants, and they're really interested in a lot of things within the agriculture ecosystem that we feel is derived from primary production, and that's the notion of sustainability, sustainable production, food traceability, food safety, food authenticity. So from a TELUS standpoint, we really looked at our experience in health and what we did 10 years ago when we started down that road, and took that and applied it to agriculture. And we feel that working within each of those verticals and thinking systemically about the data sets that are derived from each of those and bringing them together, we think there's a real opportunity. It's early days, I would say, in the application and digitization of food and agriculture, which makes it exciting because there's all kinds of really interesting technology and capabilities out there. But we looked at it through that lens, and we have a very long-term approach to what we're trying to do here within agriculture and food from a TELUS standpoint.
That's great, Chris. So, you know, when I listen to you, you use the word ecosystem, and you talk about those three verticals. Let me ask you this, and then I'm going to turn to Bill Gruel. As you think about it, like, are you approaching each opportunity client by client? Or when we talk about these challenges as systemic, right? Or that require new forms of partnership to accelerate uptake, how do you look at the sector? Like, do you feel we can achieve the uptake if we don't change the way those sectors or those verticals coordinate their adoptions of technologies? And what do you observe about that ecosystem in terms of that? And then Bill, over to you. I mean, you're leading a collaborative, a super cluster where you've got to bring these entities together. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on your experience to date.
So it's a great question. I think when we think about it and when we look at it, you know, it's interesting. Like, I'll just give a simple example. We know in the CPG industry today, those products that are making on-pack claims of sustainability are growing at 5.6 times the rest of the market from a CPG standpoint. So how do you make that sustainability claim? You need the data provenance associated with the production of that product, by way of example. And to me and to us at TELUS, that comes from primary production or from the farmer. The producer or the farmer will not adopt technology just for the sake of adopting it. Like, there's no use in that. You've actually got to look at it in a way that creates an economic outcome for them. And we believe that you have to bring that together with the food side and the consumer side to do so. So if you're creating or producing food in a way that has value-added attributes associated with it from a sustainable production standpoint, by way of example, the value in that, you know, is something that a consumer will subscribe to, and the value in that should be passed back up to the producer. So when we think about it, it's not on a client-by-client basis, but our thesis and our theory and what we're really trying to do is to link the data sets from each of those different verticals, so each of the players can work together to create a better outcome. We look at it in a way that, you know, from a TELUS standpoint, we won't have every solution that a farmer uses, and we won't have every solution that a CPG company needs as well, or a processor, or a packer, or a shipper. So we really believe that we've got to create this data ecosystem that we can all play in to do that and link the data sets from each vertical over time. And I think in that instance, as an industry, we really have to think of the notion of co-opetition and working together to create the outcome, as opposed to just solely having our own solutions within each vertical.
Great, perfect segue. Over to you, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Rory, and thanks to CAPI for having me. You know, I was listening to the Deputy Minister speak, and there is a theme running through all of those conversations, whether or not it's health, environment, agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, or kind of what Chris put on the table here. And that's the idea of interconnectedness and systems thinking, which is permeated, I think, through the CAPI report. And this notion that the problems that we're facing and even the opportunities that are in front of us today are really nothing that we can solve by any one entity. So this idea of collaboration, and DM Forbes talked about it very clearly, is underpinning a lot of the work that we have to think about in the future of how we're going to approach and do systems thinking in agriculture. And so certainly, you know, the work we're doing at Protein Industries Canada, I think, is a very live example of that. And so much of the work that we're doing is trying to reach across the value chains. And Rory, you asked a question of me a little bit about, you know, how are we doing that? What are the challenges? I'd say, first off, easy to say and hard to do. The notion of collaboration, and where Chris went, which is co-opetition, is really about changing behaviors and doing things differently in Canada. And I think as we have worked on these issues and problems and challenges at Protein Industries Canada, we've pushed this notion of co-opetition and working together. And as people have seen the benefits of it, it becomes easier over time, but it takes time, it is not easy, and it takes a lot of trust between members of the ecosystem. So getting there, but I think critical to the issues and challenges that we're facing in the agri-food sector today.
Thanks, Bill. And maybe Bettina Hemland. So you sit in a unique position in terms of trying to bridge the interests of academia, science and technology, and industry to adopt technology. Again, like to hear a bit more then about how you see this working And that idea of systems thinking or public-private partnerships, how is it working in the space of biotech and genomics?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rory, and thanks to CAPI for having me here. This is a fantastic discussion. And so, you know, the way that I look at the world I'm dealing with is, what are the challenges we're trying to solve? And, you know, right now, we are in a climate crisis. The pandemic is a huge crisis. Antimicrobial resistance, big crisis. And then when one thinks about what is it I can do to solve these issues, it becomes clear very quickly that alone, you can do very little. You can do some things, but you can do very little to actually solve the problem. And so I think that's been my driving force through my career as I transitioned through different environments, is that aspect of collaboration across systems and sectors, and the country, quite frankly, is really quintessential, I think, for us to solve any of these issues. And food is such a big part in there as well. So let me explain, you know, how science really can help. And by the way, I would say that, you know, this One Health idea is not quite as elusive as it might think. You know, I think about my own organization, Ontario Genomics. We're all about health. We're about the health of people, the health of plants, the health of animals, the health of the environment, the health of the economy. And we have this common denominator, which is a technology platform that allows us to, you know, work and make progress in each of these areas. And then first thing you recognize is a technology that has accelerated a diagnostic for COVID on the health side can help develop a diagnostic in wastewater, can lead to diagnostics of pathogens and invasive species. So there's all these interconnections. And so what's really happening on the science side is that the lines between you know, disciplines and sectors are blurring more and more. When we think about genomics, you know, genomics has revolutionized agriculture in terms of, you know, yields and resistance patterns tremendously. But now what's so exciting is that there's this convergence of genomics, big data, artificial intelligence, robotics, miniaturization, applying engineering principles to biological systems. And so there's this new era of that we call a new industry, really, that we call engineering biology or synthetic biology, where we see applications in all kinds of different areas. And actually, Simon Kennedy spoke about, you know, the Epsilera example, the messenger RNA vaccine examples, all examples that are coming out of these approaches. And, you know, when I look at the Agri-Food system and the report, which I think there's so many really great aspects, you know, the symptoms working, the collaboration. But I think we should be bold in terms of integrating new technologies. You know, technologies are evolving at a rate that's incomprehensible to many of us. But there are really great technologies that allow us to, for example, use inputs very differently, our biomass, food waste, agricultural waste, in this area of cellular agriculture, where we use fermentation and cell technologies to make, you know, all kinds of alternative proteins, milk, you know, meat, eggs, flavors, pet food, other products like leather. So there's a lot of, you know, value added opportunities. And, you know, this is an area that is exploding. We have looked at investments. There's more than $6 billion being invested in these new areas in the last, you know, 12 to 18 months. Some of the biggest rounds of funding leverage are in this area right now. And by the way, Canadian venture capitalists, including the Canadian Pension Fund Investment Board, is investing in these technologies outside of Canada. So I would encourage us to think about how do we use our own biomass, and we do this and we get investment in Canada. And I think that's where collaboration, strategic thinking, how does this fit together with other areas in this supply chain. But there's an opportunity that we risk losing if we, don't think about integrating it. And let me just say that, technology alone is not going to do it. And that's where the collaboration is also so important. You had a very eloquent speaker last week at a session from Cornell University who spoke about this bundling of technology with socio-cultural innovation, with regulatory innovation. And I think we have all these ingredients, but bringing it together is really essential to bring these technologies actually into the hands of people. So Rory, a long answer to say collaboration, systems approach, strategic, openness, leadership to take on some new ways of doing it, and bringing it in will help with sustainability, with value-added products, and open up revenue streams and markets that are exploding around us that I think we want to have a part of.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Caitlin, can you take us now to the farm level here? Because we're hearing a lot of lofty visions of technology, science and technology platforms, One Health concepts, digital solutions. And I'd love to hear your perspective on how you see this being de-risked and incented for uptake at the farm level. And again, organizationally, how do we advance beyond just individual uptake to more collective action by, farm businesses in Canada?
Thank you so much, Rory. Before I respond, I want to say I'm very grateful to be here amongst a team of esteemed leaders. I will wear the token millennial badge with pride here today. I want to acknowledge that here in Regina, I am a guest on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional homeland of the Cree, Saulteaux, Ojibwe, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. Thank you. So to respond to your question, Rory, I really appreciate the approach taken by CAPI here today, where we're talking about big solutions. And I think this is absolutely an ambitious dialogue, but absolutely necessary as well. And so the challenge, of course, is that with big solutions comes big change, and that's hard. I think one of the challenges from the farm level would be related to Dr. Barnett's true truths that he spoke about last week. So the first one, of course, is that, in the 70s, modern agriculture set out to increase the supply of staple food crops to prevent starvation. And we did it. We did it very successfully. The second truth, of course, is that there is a negative spillover or negative externalities with some of these practices. And so that's related to human health, to the environment, to different socioeconomic status or socioeconomic factors. And so really that's, I think, where the challenge is going to be within the agriculture industry, is to identify problems that need to be solved. And so from a policy perspective, my opinion is that before we look at policy options, we need to be specific about what we're trying to solve. From my opinion, the problem in our food system would be access to nutrient-dense foods. So if I'm to think of an aspirational, ideal food system, it is one that minimizes the negative externalities associated with producing nutrient-dense foods while providing economic opportunities for Canadians. And so I'm absolutely supportive of this One Health approach. And, just listening to the dialogue already here today, you can hear the synergies between health and agriculture in technology, in bundles, in, the way we think about health with, with people, with animals, financial as well. And really that goes back to the three-legged approach to sustainability. And I would argue that perhaps the next generation of producers is concerned and feeling the pressure in the other two legs of the stool that are social and environmental. And so those are the areas where I think we really need to identify the issues in that area and look at the science and then move forward as well. So looking at the entire food system for me is not just talking about production, but it is talking to consumers, engaging, of course, public and private industry, but also engaging our First Nations leaders as well. And so a collaborative approach to me results in the best policy possible.
Great, thank you, Caitlin. So Gaëtan Desroches, maybe we can go back to you on that question then of value added and uptake of technology. I guess where I wanted to probe a bit here is we talk about bundling, we talk about environmental and social benefits, we talk about externalities to production, but all of the, I come from a private sector career at Maple Leaf where competitiveness and scale and solving the immediate interests for stakeholders like investors, is a major day-to-day challenge. And we start in Canada with some real worrying conditions in terms of our scale and competitiveness. And now we're trying to build into the mandate of business more and more, if you will, environmental and social objectives. How do you see that? How do you solve for that in an organization like Solio? Or let's take Olymel. You mentioned the pork export issues that we're facing and the critical need to be competitive and manage these risks in markets. How do we do that while also moving forward at an accelerated pace in all these new directions? I think you're on mute, Gaëtan.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah.
I will start by talking about the consumer. What I see that the consumer actually needs to trust our products more, and they want to favor a local purchase, and that worked with the pandemic, and but we have to develop that further. And I really connect with what Chris said in terms of connecting everything together. So the industry, and we have to increase that traceability and work with blockchains, and I think that could actually work in our favor, and also to have products that actually the consumer wants. And I think thanks to technology, we'll be able, that's what I believe at least, that we'll be able to capitalize on the data sets that we have to be able to deliver on what the consumers want. And I think that's something you mentioned is our productivity in our factories. I think artificial intelligence would actually help us remain competitive globally. And I think otherwise we're too dependent on human labor right now. So I think we need to adopt that technology, but we have to make sure that the consumer will also follow us. Otherwise it will lead us nowhere.
Yeah. We've got to work in tandem with the consumer interest and pull these technologies based on consumer interest. So look, well, there's one big piece here that I do want to touch on before we run out of time. It is around climate crisis. It's about the carbon footprint of the agri-food sector, but it connects to this question of market-based solutions that CAPI has identified. And I'm very interested in perspective on this. Do we have the setup to drive market-based solutions to the carbon emissions of agriculture and food in Canada? We heard from the deputies about all the initiatives and the programs under the Climate Action Plan from a government point of view, but I think we all know that's not enough, that the private sector investment has to shift, and we need to understand how technologies can be market related to adopt or to accelerate the sequestration of carbon. Who would like to comment on carbon and market-based solutions in agriculture and food?
Well, Rory, I can maybe just provide some context to the question. It's a really interesting opportunity that I get to talk to consumer packaged goods companies and ingredient manufacturers asking this question. I can't get into a conversation with them until 10 minutes in, we're talking about sustainability of ingredients, sustainability of food products, and how it is that Canada can prove that out. And so I think a lot about the data systems that we need to drive toward that. And so do we have the market-based solutions? Well, we certainly have the market pull because consumer packaged goods companies are asking about it all the time. And I think if I look back throughout the value chain, there is an awareness of this, a growing awareness of this across all sectors of the value chain, and a lot of people putting a thought process around this, around a market-based solution. So I do believe the technology exists. I think it comes back to some of the opening commentary we had about connecting the dots, taking a systems approach, having the data and information systems to manage this, and driving towards what consumers are asking for in terms of the environmental sustainability of ingredients and food products.
Mm-hmm. Chris, Terrace, from the TELUS point of view. Yeah, please. Okay, Gaetan.
So I just wanted to comment on what William, piggyback on what William said, and Kathleen expressed that very clearly. Yes, we have all that technology, but we can feel that all the farmers have this concern. So we have to also think about technological transfer, and also and we have to think about those programs to actually support that change. And I can give you the example of creating attractive land that they're not exploiting along pathways, but then for them it's land that they're not using. So we have to work together. So I think it's important to work across disciplines. I absolutely agree with that comment, and I think that makes me think that often we think that we're working together with everyone, but I think we have to be even more inclusive.
And maybe to build on some of those things is, we have, I think there is market pull for a number of items that will help us in this quest. Caitlin talked about, the nutritional value of foods. Chris talked about packaging. So we're working with a number of academic researchers and companies to establish an upcycling consortium where we, use novel technology to take, in this case, potato skins, agricultural food, other food wastes, and use new technologies to convert them into value-added products. In this case, bioplastics that companies like Starbucks are looking for. So I think there is a lot of market pull. There is technology, bringing the right people together to help us advance this technology. I think provides us an opportunity for the circular economy that reduces carbon footprint. Because once you get into fermenting cells to do things for you, you are like zero carbon footprint. So there's some real novel opportunities that I think we should integrate in our end-to-end solution in this whole thing.
Right. And Chris, then, are there digital solutions to advance this, the carbon issue in agriculture, and how do we create the market pull for them?
Yeah, I mean, there's a really interesting comment in the Q&A that just popped in that I agree wholeheartedly with, and it's the notion of the adoption of new practices at the farm level have to come with a clear ROI. And I think the idea of having the data provenance and the data to actually articulate sustainable production practices in a way that you can prove comes with the adoption of digital technologies. And I think for a producer, you've got to have a clear value proposition for them. So we talk a lot about consumer activity looking for sustainable products, sustainable packaging, sustainable transport. I think the whole notion of the logistics side of agriculture and agri-food is a key component of the sustainability discussion. But unless a producer is codifying their activities and putting them down digitally and using that to transit upstream, I think you've got a gap. And I think we talk a lot about the consumer demand, but we don't talk about what the return is to the farmer. And I think until we've got that value proposition well articulated, we'll struggle with adoption of technology. Today at TELUS, when we look at digital technologies for farms, we know in Canada, about 50% of farmers are actually using a digital solution. Another 50% of them are using two. So that's, you've got a quarter that are using two solutions because it's not meeting their needs. And when we think about the competition that we have, a lot of it's pen and paper and whiteboard for a farmer in terms of how they do their crop plan, how they think about what they're applying and, you know, calculate their yield. I think to move out of that pen and paper where, you know, healthcare was many, many years ago, we all remember walking into the doctor's office and, you know, the receptionist pulling the manila folder with our health record on it. We've got to prove the value to the producer. And I think that the only way we do that is by connecting the producer to food and then ultimately to the consumer. So we've got to take very much a systems approach on it. So that's why our bias towards that systems mentality. And I think digitization starts with value to the producer, and then that value can be transited downstream to the consumer over time.
Great. Thank you, Chris. So, you know, as I think about all of these themes, let's circle back then to the basic findings of the CAPI research and the you know, the outcome of the dialogue last week: strategic thinking, systems approach, public-private partnership, aspirational leadership. Maybe we can do a roundtable here then, each of you. I'd love to hear your view about what does that mean practically from the private sector point of view. Like, we heard Chris Forbes argue that collaboration is pretty good, and I agree with him. Actually, we've got some collaboration in agri-food based on the constitutional sharing of responsibility and the tradition of program cost sharing and so on. In some ways, that's superior to other sectors of the economy. But on the other hand, I think Chris would be the first to say often he's frustrated working with our sector on these big solutions because we as private sector are fragmented. We've got multiple voices and we don't have governance of our interests in the way that makes it easy to work, you know, government industry together. So I'm wondering what people feel. Should we be thinking about bigger solutions to solve for that coordination just within the private sector and thereby work more effectively with government? Or is that you know, a pipe dream to imagine we can find some new, well, public-private partnerships to solve things like the One Health challenge? Maybe, again, I'll start with you, Bill, because you're kind of in the forefront of that collaboration.
Yeah, thanks, Rory. And I go back, Chris Forbes said we shouldn't claim victory in this space, but we are getting better. And I do believe we're getting better. I think one of the issues that I might see is the silos that we have in terms of industry associations in the agri-food sector in Canada. We did some mapping around this post-COVID. There's well over 400 industry associations in the agri-food space in Canada. If you look at plant, animal, you know, provincial, national, and across the value chain. So it's very hard to get a common voice about what needs to get done. And so I think, you know, there is some responsibility that we bear and I get the irony. I represent the not-for-profit industry association as I say this, but we really do have to get some cohesion among the private sector on what the big issues are that we're trying to solve. I would be an advocate for working more directly with government. I think the problems are like we've talked about today. It's too big for any one entity to solve, and there has to be some level of coordination. I think it's landing on what really are the key issues that we need to solve in Canada and putting the horsepower behind getting that done.
Okay, let's now go to Caitlin.
Yeah, Rory, thank you. I just wanted to circle back there a couple minutes ago in the conversation regarding the climate crisis. You know, I've been thinking about this a little bit, and to me, the simplest, well, not simple, but the most obvious solution is around food waste. How resilient and sustainable are we if we are wasting 60% of what we produce here and all of the resources that go into producing that food? There's methane emissions that come from that. So market-based solution, value-added processing of course, biofuels, biofertilizers. I think that's huge opportunity for the value-added sector. In regards to Chris's comment about return on investment at the farm gate, absolutely. And that's been, you know, the driver of any business is, you know, you have to remain profitable. But I would say that value is now being perceived in the intangible form as well. So, you know, I would point to an example. You know, I'd thought about creating a bio bed on our farm. And to me, this was an expense. There wasn't a tangible ROI. But consumers knowing that we were looking at proactive ways to deal with our pesticide waste, given a location right on the highway, was of value to me. And I think the, ignoring aspects of intangible value has resulted in some public trust issues for the industry. So I would say that, of course, there has to be an ROI, a business has to remain profitable to exist. But the intangibles are, there's potential on that side as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Moving across my screen, Chris, what's your advice? Again, and I think about this from TELUS working in the health sector, where we talk about dysfunction or governance or coordination of interests across health. You're now working in the ag space. What can you observe or maybe even compare between working with the two different sectors?
So I don't personally have a ton of background in the health space. Obviously, TELUS, we do. I think for me, everything that CAPI's talked about, we need to touch on, right? The notion of a systemic or a system approach. I think, yeah, we all agree to that. I think we have to be strategic and think about where we want to be a couple of years from now. I actually I do believe that there is a lot of opportunity for public-private partnerships as well. I think the work that Bill is doing with the protein supercluster, TELUS, we participated in. Actually, it's interesting. We participated in the NGen manufacturing supercluster to produce cricket protein with a company called Aspire Foods. And what was really great about that is you're bringing together all kinds of talent from across Canada, whether it's Darwin AI or you've got IoT companies or TELUS and Aspire, bringing them together to actually create unique IP for Canada that we can then export. And I think the notion of having that investment stimulus to do that is a great example of public and private partnership to drive forward. And the same thing applies to Deputy Minister Kennedy's comments with respect to broadband. Adoption of technology in agriculture, and then thereby transiting that through to Agri-Food, is going to take a collective investment in Canada to make it happen. It's not going to be one solution. There'll be satellite companies, fiber companies, and 5G technology to link farmers over time. And I think that collectively, that private-public sort of co-opetition or cooperation has to happen to make it valuable and tangible for all of us across Canada.
Great. Bettina, and then Gaetan.
Yeah, thanks. So if perhaps I may illustrate a comparative example from the health side of things. There was a time of a very competitive pharma environment. And what really changed the landscape was that companies were losing their exclusivity on drugs pretty much all at the same time, and their pipelines were empty. Big crisis that led them to really buy into the concept of public-private partnership. So, that sort of illustrates, do we need a crisis to break down those silos and to be able to have these dialogues? Is the pandemic a crisis enough? Is the fact that the population is exploding and we need to feed them crisis enough? I think that's for the sector to reflect on. But I think public-private partnerships work when people come together who are willing to learn from each other and to listen to each other and to identify a common goal. And are able to look beyond the bottom line of their particular business. I think when those conditions are there and there is this, real vision of there's something bigger at stake here that we all want to solve, and there's some give and some take, I think that's when public partnerships are working. And so I think there's lots of examples where that works really well. And I would suggest that for this sector, this would be a very important thing to do. And I think there's lots of ingredients and common visions to realize that.
And finally, Gaetan, je suis toujours impressionné par...
I'm always impressed by the Quebec team in solving problems for collaboration. Are there Quebec examples that you could share with us? Yes, we have examples for funding, for example, right now. Solio, back home, We just had funding from the government where they have invested. So there is a collaboration that way for research. I would say that with the universities, we have quite a number of partnerships, and I think that works. What's most important for me right now in this report is the timing. I think that we have an unbelievable window right now with the youth. Caitlin is an example of that. They're very conscious. The young producers are very conscientious with regards to this. A lot of baby boomers will be retiring from the industry, and COVID made the consumer realize the importance of food security and to eat good products with all of the technology and value chains that we can set into place. So there's a window here. I think the timing is really good for everybody so that we are successful in implementing this great collaboration that we would like. It's essential, otherwise we won't make it. That is my conclusion. Merci. Thank you. Tyler?
Analysts here this afternoon. I think we've had a great roundtable of thoughts, and Tyler, I will turn it back to you.
Thank you, Rory, and thank you to all of our agri-food system leaders for taking part in this discussion. J'aimerais, I would like to build on that point that Gaëtan made at the end about timing. We started the discussion today talking about these 4 key outcomes that we need around sustainable intensification, a One Health approach, rules-based trade, and increasing value-added processing in Canada. And it's clear that the 4 key action are needed now more than ever to deliver on those outcomes. That's approach to systems, the strategic thinking, public-private partnerships, and aspirational leadership. And so we look forward to at CAPI to engaging the agri-food system and the broad community on these points in the future. We will be releasing the executive summary from our work program is up on our website now, but we'll be pulling that together with the information that we've got and the reactions that we heard today into a full report that will go live in about 2 weeks. Encourage everyone to go to our website, www.capi-icpa.ca, to sign up to our mailing list so you can get access to that. And again, I just really want to thank the deputies and our food system leaders. I think it was a really dynamic discussion. I took a lot away from it. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure the audience did too. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to engaging with you at CAPI events in the future. Thank you again, and have a great day.